Hi, I'm Spiro with Newsbud Breaking News coming out of Belgium, where the chief auditor of NATO, Yves Chandelon, has been found dead of a single gunshot wound to the head. Now, joining me with more information on this developing story is Newsbud founder and editor-in-chief Sibel Edmonds, and Newsbud analyst and researcher Ali Sayed, who studied business and economics at the University of Kent at Canterbury and is fluent in French, English, Urdu, and has some proficiency in Dutch. Now, Sayed is based in Belgium, where this apparent suicide had taken place. Now, Sayed, can you give me a little bit of background on Mr. Chandelon, the departed?
Yes, he was a high functionary of NATO, in fact, the chief auditor. He is the son of a Belgian businessman based out of Liège. And would you like some background on his family history?
Please.
Yes. His father was the CEO of a company called Career Gravier Sable, and he managed to get his son a job as a banker in Liège. But soon few scandals ensued. There was some insider dealing, and before the story could get big, his father took him out of the job and sent him to Luxembourg in another bank for a bit. And there he gradually increased a lot of the bank's clientele base by introducing his Belgian clients to the Luxembourg branch, and slowly moved his way up within the banking sphere. And in 1998, eventually managed to get a job in NATO. And that is despite having no formal education, no diploma, no banking degrees. It's very much a family connection that got him there, pretty much.
Well, Sayed, now our information here in the U.S. and in English is pretty limited on this story as it is developing. The initial reports that we're seeing here is that his body was found 140 kilometers away from his work and 100 kilometers away from his home. Now, you being there in Belgium, what additional information do you have on the location of where his body was found?
Well, it's 100 kilometers from his office in Luxembourg, and nearly the same distance from his house where his family resides. There is some interesting connections with the location in regards to one of his friends lived there 500 meters away from where he was found dead. That friend was owed around 45,000 euros by the deceased. And there was some speculation that it could be debt related, what happened to him.
So in our reports here, we see that the departed, Mr. Chandelon, the NATO auditor chief, was a registered firearm owner, that he owned 3 registered firearms, but they say that the weapon that was found near his body was not registered to him. What else do we know about this weapon here?
Well, indeed, he owned the license to 3 firearms, and the weapon used, as you say, was not one of the 3 registered firearms. This was a firearm that he kept in the glove compartment, which he used which was used in the death. So.
Now, in the English versions of the reports, they state that the firearm was found near his body. What are you reading? What are you seeing there in Belgium?
Yes, the initial reports were a bit conflicting, but as the story moved on, it's pretty clear that the firearm was in the deceased's hand, on his in his right hand, actually. And the way he shot himself was point blank, with the actual weapon touching his head, pretty much. And it's a bit strange that the weapon was found in his hands, while as the recoil would, in such a position, usually lets the weapon fly around and not in the person's hand itself.
Now, one interesting detail is you do have the Belgian newspaper there. Can you show us what you're referencing here?
Well, this is La Muse. It's a French language newspaper, and it's the latest edition. And the title reads "The Strange Double Life of Mr. Chandelon."
One thing that jumped out at Sibel and I when you were telling us what you had found on this story was that the firearm was not found by his side, as initially reported here in the U.S., but that the firearm was in his right hand. And you had told me in that paper, according to statements from friends and family, that Mr. Chandelon was left-handed. Is that correct?
Indeed. Yes, that's confirmed by various newspapers, and it's all every time reported that he is indeed left-handed, and the firearm was found in his right hand, which is one of the sources of the major suspicion that it may not have been a suicide.
Well, what else are the family and friends saying at this point? Do they believe that the initial reports that this is being ruled a suicide?
Well, none of his friends and family believe that. In fact, the night before his death, he was partying with a lot of his acquaintances, making plans to go on holidays with his family. So nobody believes that he was in such a mental state where he would commit suicide, nor the money owed was such a substantial amount for him. He was pretty well off with a good salary and could have taken a loan anytime. So people are very suspicious here, specifically the friends and family. They do not believe the official reports.
Well, this is very interesting. I mean, it gets more interesting by minutes as you're communicating some of the information you are obtaining from Belgium. So we have this guy, he's left-handed, yet the weapon is found, in his right hand. As you said, with that kind of a shot, close shot, the recoil would have thrown the gun up. The fact that he's still holding onto the gun, and this is right-handed on a guy who's left-handed, that is suspicious. And we have family members who are all saying that, no, this is not a suicide, and they are insisting on the fact that this was not a suicide. And on top of that, as you mentioned to us, this guy, he has been actually telling his brother or son to keep certain information because in case something happens to him. How did that come about in terms of how did that even come out?
Yes, it's in the latest edition of the newspaper, and this is the breaking information, actually. And his son, who's called Xavier, had been given letters by his father, sensitive documents is what it states in the newspaper, by his father to keep as, let's say, insurance in case something happened. These are the exact words used. And all these documents were handed over to the police on Monday and Tuesday.
So again, that's very interesting. The other thing that I don't know much about, even though in the past I had spent some time studying the whole logistical, structural form of NATO and operations, but I never really paid attention to the position of the general auditor. I mean, what were the main macro responsibilities under this guy Chandelon?
So the reported responsibilities is usually looking for evidence of manipulation of funds and making black money white. And the second most important responsibility he had was dealing with the finances of terrorism. So researching how terrorism is funded, which companies are being used, and yes, so it was terrorism funded and whitewashing money that he was investigating.
For how long did he hold this position with NATO under this title? How long has he been with NATO?
He's been with NATO. He joined NATO in 1998, and since the very beginning he's maintained the same position. So he's been researching the accounts and already for a long time, sensitive accounts.
Of course, we still have additional information pouring in. It's interesting to see how things develop. In some of these suspicious suicides like this, sometimes you have the family members initially raising hell, saying this is not suicide, but then mysteriously they get quiet and they become quiet. And one of the examples this one brought in mind with me was the suicide, the mysterious, questionable, highly questionable suicide of Dr. David Kelly in UK. And he was the scientist, professor with specialties on WMD. He was employed by the Defense Ministry of UK and studying WMD related cases and providing analysis. And of course, in 2002, 2003, when we had all these things with the WMD and Iraq and Saddam Hussein and all those fake news and all the forgeries, This guy actually was gutsy enough, Dr. Kelly, to speak with reporters and start actually challenging the misinformation, all the lies that were being put out by the British government. And again, very interestingly, after he started facing some retaliations, he was found dead, a few hundred meters from his house in a park, overdosing and killing himself with these box of pills. And then his autopsy results were actually classified. So the British government would refuse to release his autopsy report, while at the same time insisting that it was a suicide. And of course, several scientists, doctors, people in the UK, they formed a group and they started demanding the release of this autopsy, etc. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because Dr. David Kelly's family, initially, they were skeptical and they were saying, well, this is unusual, and they didn't think it was suicide. But very interestingly, within a week or even less than that, suddenly the wife and the family members started backing off and saying, no, they don't want to push for additional information, while you had all these groups of other people, launching inquiry in this thing, and even with the autopsy report being classified. So it will be very interesting to see if we start witnessing change of tune by the family members, in this case, with Chandelon's case. Now, on the other hand, when I'm looking at it, as you said, this guy had a pretty colorful background. He was in the banking industry, and we know the banking industry, when it involves Luxembourg and Belgium, how those have been the hub for a lot of illicit activities. And it's a kind of a pretty sleazy industry to be operating in, and especially at that high level. So the fact that this guy has been working with the NATO with this position, with this title, since 1998, it makes me exclude the possibility of any whistleblowing, and any kind of retaliation like NATO wanting to hush him up. Because look at this guy; he's been there for 20 years, and we know NATO as I would say one of the world's top shadiest organizations, and he has been playing the game because he's one of them. Why did they select him in the first place? It was based on his colorful past and coming from that shady banking industry in that part of the world. So I tend to, at this point, I'm inclined to say, unlike Dr. David Kelly's case, this case is not going to be a whistleblowing case. This is not a guy who would blow whistle on anything. So that leaves a couple of other possible hypotheses in this mysterious, highly questionable suicide, so-called suicide. Of course, one has to do with what you just mentioned. This guy was a party guy. He owed a bunch of people money. But then again, as you said, Ali, it was he could have in any given time get loan and pay those up. So it was not as if he was destitute and he was being blackmailed and he didn't have the money to pay off those people that he borrowed from. We still right now don't know. We may get some information about some severe gambling problems. Who knows? But at this point, it doesn't seem likely from where I stand. And when I look at this information, I'm saying, okay, with this, with his level, we can preclude that. Well, the other thing I'm looking at right now, we are all looking at, is the timing of this whole thing. It seems to be there is this trend of diplomats and international players, officials, being either assassinated or commit suicide or experience mysterious car crashes. And when Spiro and I, we were looking at all this latest assassination in Ankara, Turkey, with the Russian ambassador there, well, he's like, okay, within the same 24 hours, we had another high-level Russian diplomat who dealt with Latin America found shot to death in his apartment. And this is a highly secure flat with security. And his wife was supposedly in that flat. And they find a gun under the kitchen sink, which is, again, really strange. So far, they haven't been releasing any detailed information on that particular shooting case. They're just saying that they took the wife into safety. Well, is it possible that the wife maybe was involved with the gun being placed under the kitchen sink, some hysterical woman shooting, her husband? That's a possibility. We don't know yet because we haven't seen additional reports coming from Russia. But you look at that, you look at the assassination of Russian ambassador in Turkey, and 2.5 months before that, it was Putin's favorite driver who died in this very mysterious freak car accident. And then we are looking at 4 or 5 days ago with this highly mysterious, questionable suicide. So is it possible from where we stand and we look at these things that we are experiencing, going through some, international hits and assassination operations, and somehow this ends up being between Russia and the United States or the Western sources? I mean, would it be too crazy to look at all these incidents just in the past 5-6 days and say something is going on? Something is going on. Ali?
Yes, I'm sure everybody is aware of it, and this is my personal theory that I think NATO is going through a shift. It's losing allies. It's trying to look for new allies. Turkey may be pivoting towards the Russian side. And I think the whole infrastructure that's based on the first agenda, which is shifting to a second agenda, which is no longer war in Syria, for example, I think the plans have been pretty much forgotten about that. I mean, so this whole trend and shift, I think a lot of the old operatives and the new operatives and just the clash in directions, I think it's leading to all this. Obviously, it's rather vague and it's not specific, but this is the impression I'm getting.
Well, that brings me to, I think, the key information to conclude this case and have something conclusive. At this point, I would say the information that this guy's son has been sitting on. Because this guy goes to his son and he says he wants to give him this information because in case something happens to him. When you have a case like this, because look, I have been in this area for 15 years. And every time I come across certain information that I know is very sensitive, and I know that not many people are aware of, it is one of the first thing I would do, or I recommend any whistleblowers or even any journalists do. And that is to make sure that information in a documented form resides with other people, not one, hopefully 3, 4, not in one country, hopefully more than one country. That is not a 100% slam dunk life insurance, but it is some level of insurance. Well, what could it be? The information that this guy would say, this in case something happens to me. Now, this would be either this information related to some of the activities outside his work he was involved with. That's possibility A. Possibility B would be, even though he was the systems guy, he lasted there, he was shady to start with, is it possible that maybe by accident or coincidentally, he came across certain NATO-related operation or a cover-up that he was not supposed to? I mean, not that he has loose mouth, obviously he doesn't, but they found out that he has this information. And if he has that information, he starts thinking, knowing NATO, how NATO operates, saying, I came across this information, I don't want to do anything about it, but they may want to take me out anyway. That they may want to take me out anyway because I was not within that compartmentalized group who was supposed to know about this information. And considering NATO, Operation Gladio A, Operation Gladio B, and the funding and the arming of ISIS and everything that is going on, would you agree that that would be the biggest lead we would have, and that would be the son? And I'm ready to wage a bet that the son is going to be silenced, not by death. They are going to do enough, let's say if it's NATO related, that he wouldn't open his mouth. Meaning, did this guy take the information with him into the grave? I mean, what is your response to that, Ali?
I think first of all, he's put his son in a dangerous position. handing him his document. So he must have feared for his life, I suppose. And those documents must have been very, very sensitive. I mean, that's how they're described in the newspaper reports here, as sensitive documents. But the fact that they were given to the police, it's pretty much that leverage is gone. So obviously it depends what NATO's reach in the police is, and so I think the son just gave all the documents. I mean, he could have kept them and used it as insurance for himself, but it states that he gave all the documents away. So,
have we had any comments from the son?
Oh no, we just have his name. It's Xavier, and I think it's a son because he was married 3 times, the father. So, and now he's married to his 3rd wife. So I'm supposing it's one of the previous sons from one of the previous marriages.
Well, I think this is as far as the English reporting goes. This is going to be one of the most important developments being reported. What we are doing here to our viewers, our audience here in the U.S., in UK, and people who haven't been finding anything, just like us, going and researching this guy. There is nothing in English, and I'm surprised that it's been since Friday. You know, this took place last Friday. And I am absolutely, even knowing how awful the mainstream media and the pseudo-alternative media is, just the fact that right now we are Thursday, okay, it's Thursday, it's been more than 6 days, and we haven't seen anything being covered within the US media. I mean, is that surprising to you, Ali?
It's very surprising, and some of the few reports that I did manage to get in English were coming from Russian sources. So, it's first of all, it's also surprising why the Russians are taking so much interest in this, because I mean, all the Russian newspapers are ahead of this compared to the English-speaking newspapers. Secondly, also it's been a very busy news cycle this past week with a lot of things happening. So. I mean, I'm not so surprised that it's not on headline news and it's not being picked up. But again, we don't know how connected this is to all the other things that are happening. I mean, the initial reaction would go in the direction of saying that there is some connection between what's happening in Turkey and, as you say, what happened in Latin America, all these officials dying. So yes, pretty much we're still waiting on more information at this point.
You're absolutely right. Based on my experience, there are never really that many coincidences, especially when you're dealing with that part of the world and with these types of operations and with these types of figures. And given the fact that we have had this escalation of tension between the United States and Russia, for example, the timing of the Russian ambassador assassination, which Spiro and I will be covering it with our analysis, detailed analysis. But I would like to take the opportunity and for 2 quick things here before we wrap up this. And I believe we will have another session with you as you start obtaining more information in Belgium, or hopefully just Newsbud putting this information out will bring attention from other alternative media sources, or actually shame the mainstream media here into saying, oh shit, excuse my language, you know, now we are really starting to look bad. We may as well do some of, you know, a couple of fluff pieces and put it out there and say, there it is, we covered it. What was that movie? Was it Top Gun, where the guy says, we have to put that clip, Spiro, into this video. Nothing to see here, folks. Just go away. There is nothing to see here. We'll play that clip for you. But quickly, I want to take this opportunity and welcome you, Ali, and announce you joining Newsbud team. We have been delighted working with you. I discovered you through Twitter, and I was really impressed with what you have been paying attention, what you have been covering and communicating through the social media, knowing that here is someone who's seeing beyond the fluff, beyond the cheesy, unimportant headlines, and is really focusing on really important developments that we don't see being reported around. And with your language skills and being in Belgium, we started working with you a few weeks ago. And as we were getting ready to record this segment, we were telling you about this karma business, and I already confessed I'm not a hippy-dippy person, but as soon as we started communicating with you and you came on board, we started looking at this investigative story that Spiro and I have been working heavily, hard work, investigative report, and lo and behold, the center of our story, a major center of our story, happens to be Belgium. And again, speaking of 1998, this guy's area, it would be good. We're going to have the link to a very important story article that was written in 1996 by Dean Andromedis. And Spiro, you can just give us a little broad overview of all these mysterious suicides and assassinations that took place in Belgium in early 90s, and how they were covered up, and how many of them to this date remains unsolved. Now, with Andromedis, the center of operation was Liège in Belgium, and some shady activities there, both in the industrial weapons manufacturers there and the airport. But our story takes us elsewhere in Belgium as well. But looking at this article that was written in 1996 on these highly mysterious, questionable assassinations and so-called suicides in Belgium, folks. We are talking about where NATO headquarters is. And then having this popping up, it makes me in a way more pessimistic, saying, well, the chances of this being solved or solved accurately and communicated with the public is very, very low, considering the fact that Belgium has had this track record of sitting on unsolved assassinations and suicides. And again, this is the heart of the beast. This is where NATO is located. Spiro?
Well, I think you pretty much summed it up there, Sibel. There has been it's been documented that Belgium, the headquarters of NATO, and as you exposed, Gladio B and then Operation Gladio before, there's a lot of things taking place in this region. And Syed, that's where you call home. It's interesting that all of this comes together as we're investigating this case that we're looking into that, as you said, centers largely around Belgium and that area, and a lot of the operations that were going on there. And there were several high-profile assassinations that took place during this time period that pretty much just get swept under the rug. Assassinations or hits that would take place in broad daylight in front of the victim's home, and these cases go unsolved. There would be suicides that would then be overturned, and they would reopen the case like a year later saying, well, maybe it wasn't suicide. We need to look into this, but still nothing comes from it. But these are high-level people like generals in the Belgian military, and so there's some very interesting information. We've been, as you said, very busy, hard at work, digging up decades of information and contacting sources, and I'm very excited about this Newsbud exclusive that we're working on, that we're going to be looking to have out shortly within the next few weeks. And Syed is a big part of that. Sibel, a big part of that. We have a few other irons in the fire, so to speak. We're not going to show our whole hand yet, but definitely looking forward to that. And also, as you mentioned, Sibel, previously, we're going to be releasing our conversation dissecting this assassination that took place in Ankara of the Russian ambassador. So a lot to look forward to on Newsbud. We know it's the holidays, and everyone's out doing their family things and their last-minute shopping, but we're still hard at work here, and we're going to be churning out the content for everyone.
Absolutely. Again, welcome, Ali. It's an honor to have you on board. It's been a pleasure working with you, and we are going to have more on this story. And as for other story that we are working on, very soon we are going to release the first installment, and part of it we are going to make it open source investigation. And we mentioned some of the reasons for this. For example, when you start looking into this area, what right now Spiro and I and Ali and several other people, not only in the US, but in other places, not only in Belgium, working on, and it's an area that anybody who comes close and touches, they either get to be silenced, they go away and they don't dig any further, or they are silenced permanently. So bringing in our viewers with our first installment and making it part of it, open investigation, open source investigation is our goal. It is for our own safety and security, but also we believe that that kind of collaboration will bring in far more result than trying to get this thing solved between the 6-7 of us right now here. It's a major story. It's a several installments that's gonna try to cover it, but please stay tuned. And thank you very much, Ali, for joining us. And please keep us posted so we can have a follow-up on this story.
Okay, will do.
If you found this video useful, share it. Newsbud presentations are only made possible by our viewers. Subscribe to newsbud.com today to become part of the Newsbud community, where soon you will find exclusive content only available to our subscribers.